Today we're going to look at Triumph of World War One and the Legacy of World War One, continuing chapter 27. The roadmap for this notes are impact of trench warfare, how does the war end, the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and the final toll. This is some images of the trench warfare. As you can see, the destruction, the wasteland, the no man's land, some things that we've reviewed from our last lesson about the trench warfare are the primary documents and how many of the men suffered with dysentery, with lice, and with also shell shock. Here's just another picture. You can also recognize the gas masks in this image and how in close proximity. A lot of it was just stalemate. A lot of the men were doing as you can see here, kind of standing around for most of the time. In fact, there's a great book called All Quiet Along the Western Front, and that goes a little bit more in depth with it. Shell shock symptoms include tiredness, irritability, giddiness, kind of like thinking that you're always paranoid, lack of concentration, headaches. Eventually, the men would suffer mental breakdowns, making it impossible for them to function along the front line. Many of this is similar to that of post-traumatic stress disorder, where there is one event that causes you to have a lot of stress and you replay that event through your mind, and a lot of times there are some physical ailments that come along with that. As you can see, the gentleman down there at the bottom appears as though he has shell shock. As you can see in this video, if you watch it, it is queued up for a couple of the people who have shell shock coming back from World War One. If you look in our notes and you click on this video, it is a great representation of it. It's only about 2 minutes if you watch it, and you can pause it there as well. It's from the Century America's Time of 1914 to 1919. It is not a must-have if you are not able to watch it, but it is a good visual representation of what shell shock looks like. Recap of the weapons: you have airplanes, tanks, mustard gas, machine guns. The mustard gas image there, you can see the men holding the shoulder of the person in front of them because it would partially blind them. As far as the mustard gas itself, you can see the machine guns there as they are using that upon enemies. Again, both sides would use that. And then the tanks obviously would be able to bulldoze through the barbed wire. And then airplanes mostly used for dogfights, fighting other airplanes. Another picture of the trench warfare, again, the main style of war that they would have. You could see the right-hand side, that is more of the first of the trenches, and then on the left is more of an evolved what the trenches look like. Here's a cartoon representation of what the trenches would have. Again, type of fighting during World War One, which both sides would dig trenches to help protect them from the enemy, especially from mines and barbed wire. At the bottom, you have the duck boards. That's what they would stand on. You would have the fire step. That's what you'd step up on to fire or to go over the top, as they would say. You have the sandbags that would hopefully allow for the bullets then to hit those. And then the barbed wire was there in the no man's land. Many of the men would suffer from trench foot. This is a picture of a gentleman, soldier, who had trench foot on both feet. You can see at the top his toes, and you can see the heels kind of being very sore, very blistery. During the winter, 1914 to 1915, over 20,000 men suffered from trench foot. This was a constant pain in your foot. In many cases, that would be very, very painful to the point they would have to amputate. Now, this image is more extreme. Not all men suffered that extreme of trench foot, but many of them had some form of trench foot. How does the war end? 1917, Russia leaves war and has its own revolution. This would change from monarchy to a communist government. November 11th, major dates to remember. in any history class, November 11th, 1918, that is the armistice, or the end of the war. This was to be a ceasefire. We still honor that with Veterans Day on November 11th at the 11th hour on 1918, the 11th month. Treaty of Versailles was the treaty in which it would end the war. The Big Four, United States, Great Britain, Italy, France, they would meet with the others to write the peace negotiation. Interesting, they did not invite the losing side of Austria-Hungary, Germany. And so they were not invited to this Treaty of Versailles. Many of them blamed Germany for starting the war because they wanted more land and more power. In fact, Germany would actually lose approximately 10% of their land. That would actually come back later on with World War II. In terms of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, Germany would have to pay reparations. Those are payments. They were blamed for starting the war. This would be over $400 billion. This would put them into an economic problem for quite some time. There were also limits that they were put upon Germany. They could not have an air force, and they could not have an army that would have more than 100,000 men. In about 30 years from this standpoint, a gentleman by the name of Adolf Hitler would come about, and he would actually break the Treaty of Versailles, and that would cause World War II. Some of the legacy of the war was the flu epidemic, Spanish influenza. In 1918, the United States, for example, suffers from an international flu epidemic. This would kill over 500,000 Americans. It would disappear in 1919. There would be a small little spike or increase in the fall of 1918, where we would see another 250,000 that would actually suffer from this flu epidemic. Worldwide, it would kill 30 million people. A lot of news outlets, if you're paying close attention, have connected or have compared this to what we are currently going through with COVID-19. Interestingly enough, I'll let you do your own research on that. That is completely on your own, but it is history, and you can kind of see the time frame, 1919, and we are in 2020. So it's kind of interesting that 100 years in between, we would have two major epidemics. The final toll of the war to end all wars, is that up to this point, World War I was the bloodiest war in history. Over 9 million military deaths, 11 million civilian deaths, 20 million wounded, 10 million would be homeless or without a country of origin. They would be considered refugees, and then $338 billion in war costs. This war, again, was to be the war to end all wars. However, as we know, it was not the war to end all wars. Again, I hope you enjoyed this. This was the legacy and also the triumph of World War I.